Thank you guys so much for joining us today on the app or on the computer, depending on what you're using. We're thankful that you're taking advantage of this resource and just hope that it's been a blessing to you. And if our church is continuing to feed you spiritually and being a blessing to you and your family, we would encourage you to continue to give. In particular, right now we're in the phase of getting ready to build out and extend our student ministry building. So you're already in the app or on the computer. All you have to do is go to give, and you can set up the giving either one time or reoccurring. And again, we're just so thankful. So I hope that you enjoy the message. Have a blessed day.
Y'all will turn with me in your Bible to Galatians chapter 5, verse 13. And we'll be jumping around from 5:13, then we'll jump to 25, and then go into 6. We've been in this series for a little bit now, and today we're going to talk about spiritual people, right? It says if you are a spiritual person, then you're going to help up or restore those who are caught in sin. And some people are like, well, spiritual people, so that means the elite. And the answer is absolutely not. If you're filled with the Spirit of God, you are spiritual people. Galatians thus far has been what? It's an exposition of the gospel. It's literally telling us step by step by step, this is what the gospel is, and also what the gospel isn't. It's not something that you add on to Christ. Jesus is the only way, the truth, the life. He's the only one. You don't add anything to it. Sunday mornings is not an addition to the rest of your week. Sunday mornings is a celebration with your family in Christ. And so I just encourage you to realize what Galatians is, and then also too, think about this. It's written to Christians. Galatians is written specifically to Christians who need to know the gospel. Today, it's no different. Today, we need to know the gospel. We need to know the implications of the gospel in our lives. And so we need to keep that in mind as we read Galatians. And in particular, chapter 5 and 6 really is talking about relationships and ethics. You know, what does it mean that you know the gospel? What does it mean that Jesus has come into your life, that the Spirit has come into your life? Last week we talked about it, that a person does not continue to live in sin. Like that's not how it works. You don't claim to be a follower of Jesus and say, I'm just going to have all the freedom I want to go sin. That's not freedom, as we've been saying for a few weeks. To sin is not freedom. To sin is to be in bondage to slavery to sin. And so what we want is to be freed by the Spirit, which is to be what? To live with the Spirit, to be led by the Spirit. And today we're talking about what? Walking step in step with the Spirit of God. And so we're going to talk about relationships today. How should we interact with one another? How many of y'all know that relationships are hard? Hard. The closer they are to you, the harder sometimes they get, whether that's in your marriage or whether that's friends that you've had. Because the deal is we are continually changing. We're continually growing. We're finite beings. Therefore, we're learning as we go. But are we going in the right direction? And are we going together? There's a big difference. You've noticed that before, I'm sure, with friends, that you've grown apart because you begin to have different things that you enjoy, different things that were of concern to you. And it's very much so in Christianity. When you make the decision to follow Christ, or when you come to being a follower of Jesus, things begin to change in your lives. And if your friends are not followers of Jesus, it makes it very hard to maintain that close relationship because you're going in a completely different direction. Broad is the way to what? Destruction, but narrow is the way into the gate of Christ Jesus. And so as we read in Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, it says this, "For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another." Then last week we talked about it's evident what the flesh is. It's evident what a sinful nature does. Sexual immorality, idolatry, reveling, divisiveness, biting one another. I mean, it's really trying to destroy relationship, trying to destroy community, trying to destroy yourself. But we found out what is the fruit of the Spirit. It's love and it's joy and it's peace and it's patience and it's kindness and gentleness, self-control, and it goes on. And so we talked about those things. And so in verse 25 it says this, "If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited," all right, here's our problem, "provoking one another, envying one another. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks that he's something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. For each will have to bear his own load. And that is the word of the Lord this morning. In chapter 6 in particular, within those 5 verses, every single verse could actually be a sermon. So what you're going to get today is basically 3 points, which are actually 3 sermons if we actually dug into them a little bit deeper. But to keep the flow of things going, I'm going to move them a little bit faster. Number 1 is this: we have been free to practically love one another. Don't you love it when people say that, oh, I care about you, but then they never do anything for you when they know what your need is and it's something that they could actually do for you? Or when someone says, oh, well, I'll pray for you, but then they never come and visit you. Or they never come and say, well, how are you doing? Or follow up with you. It's not like we can always remember the things, but the point is that we practically show our love to one another. It's not just in word. What does it say in James chapter 2? It says where there is what? No spirit, the body is dead. Where there is no works, faith is dead. It's not even real. It's just a word without meaning. Today in the culture we live in, everybody has heightened words. Like, man, you are fabulous, amazing, awesome, bodacious. You know what I mean? Like, they use words and no one says bodacious. That was from Ninja Turtles back in 1990. But the point is that we use these extreme words to describe something plain. Gentleman used to not be someone who you thought was a fairly decent guy. A gentleman in the original term actually meant that you were a landowner. So when you call someone a gentleman, and like today, we call people Christians who happen to be decent people. That's not what a Christian is. A Christian is a follower of Jesus Christ who's been filled with the Spirit of God within them. And some of them, to be very honest, don't always exude all the characteristics of a gentle person or a kind person or a patient person. I'm here to raise my hand. You see what I'm saying? We're all on a different path, and some of us come from different upbringings, and some of us come with different tools in the shed, if you know what I'm saying. Some of us are driving Pintos, and other people happen to be given Mercedes. And what do you mean by that? I'm saying that your cars maybe run a little bit better, and you have a little bit better way of carrying yourself, but God nonetheless is doing a work in each of you. Every single one of our journeys is individual in the process of being together in community. So I want to bring this up. The fact is, in the beginning, everything was good. We're all longing for good. We're all longing to get back to good, and that's the beauty of the Bible. Genesis 1 and 2 talks about what? God created everything, and it was good. And he said, after he looked at everything, he said, it's very, very good. But then we also see in Revelation 21 and 22, we see good, then we see a mess for a very long time, or at least it seems that way. Then Revelation 21 and 22, we see the new heaven and new earth, the heavenly city Jerusalem being brought down to earth, God dwelling with his people, no more night, no more tears, no more pain, no more suffering, no more anything bad, only good. So we see from start to finish that God is doing a wonderful work, even in the midst of our pain and our suffering and our times of just saying, God, where are you? God's there. He's never left, even though you may feel differently about that. So everything was created good, but even in the midst of everything being created good, Genesis 2:18 says, it's not good that man should be alone. That verse is not only about getting married, the verse is also in particular about you being in healthy, godly relationships with other people. We were created to be in community because we were created in the image of God. And what is the implication of that? God is what? In the very beginning in Genesis 1, it talks about us. Let us create man in our own image. You have some of these words in the plural. All the way in the very beginning, it's hinting towards what Jesus ends up saying very clearly in Matthew 28, verse 19, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We see the work of God in the triune person all throughout the scriptures. Yes, that's beyond our comprehension, but nonetheless, it is factual. It is true. Therefore, we proclaim it. We agree with it. We seek to understand it as best we can. God has always dwelt in community. I ask you a question. How can God be love if he has no one to love? It says that God is love, which means God is, that's a fact. It's not a fact that happened after we were created. No, God is love. To love means that there must be a beloved. God has always dwelt in what? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. There's always been perfect union, perfect community, perfect relationship before any of this was ever created. And it just so happened to be the will of the Father in his sovereign grace to create us and then to be what? Very, very, very patient with us. You know as well as I do how many people, if you had the power of God, you would have already offed, right? You would have made them swim with the fishes, right? You know, you would have had your own dump company or whatever and dealt with them. But God is patient with us, thankfully. But something wrong happened within the relationships, because what happens in relationships? We're always getting hurt, aren't we? We're always getting hurt. And some of you are like, well, I'm not ever getting hurt. Well, that just means you're not having very many close relationships. If you're in close relationships, people are going to let you down. That's just a fact. If you're in relationship, people are going to let you down. People are going to disappoint you. People are going to be discouraging. Simply put, relationships sometimes can be a nightmare. I mean, I see from the outside looking in, so I don't even know necessarily what it feels like. But when you have split families who are trying to work things out and you're trying to live as a follower of Jesus, and how difficult it is because you have no control over whatever your previous spouse is doing, and now you're trying to bring two families together, two worlds together, and they're colliding. Colliding with kids, colliding with problems, colliding with all kinds of things in the background. Relationships are hard. I don't care what you say otherwise. I believe that they absolutely are hard. And that's what Paul presupposes. Look what he says here in verse 1 of chapter 6. He says, brothers, if anyone is caught in transgressions. Okay, what is that? That's a presumption. He's saying, you're going to do it. I'm assuming that something's going to happen. You're going to have people who get caught in sin. You're going to have people who are deceived by the very thing that they're doing, and they won't even think it's wrong, and they'll just keep on doing it unless someone loves them enough to come up to them and say, listen, what's taking place is, it's not right. What's going on in your life, it's not where you should be. It's not God's best for you. You know, that's really scary. The closer you are to someone, the harder it is to make those statements, simply because you have more to lose. You have more to lose in the process of making those statements. If you just saw someone doing something, you had no connection to them, you could go, what? Tell them off. Because really, there's nothing to lose on your part. But when you are in close relationship with someone and you have to tell them the truth, but you have to do it in love. We're going to get there in just a second. So it says in verse 14 and 15, it says, for the whole law is fulfilled in one word. You shall love your neighbors as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed. Did you notice the language there in verse 15? If you bite and devour, what kind of language is that? Is that human language? Not really. It's animal language. If you act like animals towards one another, always trying to get the upper hand, always trying to tear down, always trying to claw or to pull someone back, be careful that you're not devoured in the process, because it's going to happen. With the measure that you measure, so will it be measured back to you. Y'all remember those verses? See, a lot of time preachers only want to do what? The part of it, if you give, it's going to be measured to you, pressed down and overflowing. Well, the same verse goes along with how you treat other people. The way that you judge other people, the way that you see other people, the way that you're harsh to other people, it will be measured back to you. Verses right ahead of us, it says, you will reap what you sow. If you sow into the spirit, it will be eternal life. You sow into the flesh, it will be corruption and death, pain. For it says in verse 26, it gives us something really clear. It says, let us not become conceited. Let us not become conceited. And here's what conceited looks like. It's provoking one another and envying one another. So here's the problem. It's kind of summed up here for us about the way that we go about relationships. And if we go about relationships in the flesh, this is what it looks like. We'll be provoking one another. This word actually means to call forth, to challenge, like to say, I'm better than you. I look down upon you. It's having a superiority complex to someone else. But here's the other way. He says provoking one another, but also envying one another. So here's the opposite side of the equation. To envy means to experience a feeling of ill will due to real or presumed advantages experienced by someone. So what are you? You're jealous. It's an inferiority complex, right? You're always looking and saying, I don't understand why they got this or why I have this. And if I had this, I would have it. You see, it's a way of saying, you know what, I want to tear them down. And so being conceited is this. It's being delusional. Being conceited means to have this puffed up view of yourself that you're better than other people. In the King James Version, if you have it, it calls it vainglory. And the word actually means here in the Greek, it means to be empty of glory. You want to know why? Why we're always trying to do what? Either look down on people or be angry and try to tear down other people that we think have it better than us. You know why that's typically happening? It's because we're empty. The Bible tells us something that the rest of the world will not tell us. You are empty. As long as you're filled with the flesh, as long as you're filled with the emotions of the world, you will bite and you will devour and you will envy and you will become jealous of other people. You will always be trying to be in competition. Here's one of the saddest things when churches in competition with one another. The people of God, and you got to understand the letter to Galatia was not just to a single church, but it was a circular letter, which means it was going to multiple churches. So these problems maybe weren't just in one church. They might have been a problem simply from church to church to church, where they're saying, you know what, my church is better than your church, and our church music is better than your church music, and our pastor's better than your pastor, and our service activities are better than your service activities, and our seats are softer than your seats. You know, you begin to make this challenge. You begin to do what? The very same thing. You're tearing people down. Your superiority complex. You're looking down on other people. Because you're what? You're conceited. We're conceited. Philippians 2:3 says this, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility reckon others more significant than yourself. Madonna, who has had quite a career in the last, 4 decades or so, had this to say in 1991 in an interview. You would think that someone who basically has all the fame that she would want, all the money that she would want, all of the accomplishments that she would want would be someone who is satisfied, right? I mean, that's what the world tells you. If you get everything that you want, you will be satisfied. Yet when you find that you get what you want, you have to set a new goal, because it's never enough, because you're trying to fill something, which is your soul, with things that were never meant to satisfy your soul. Only Christ can do that. Listen to what Madonna said. I have an iron will, right? She can do it. She has a go-getter attitude. And here's what she says. And all of my will has always been to conquer some horrible feeling of inadequacy. I am always struggling with that fear. I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being. And then I get to another stage and think I'm a mediocre and uninteresting and insignificant. I find a way to get myself out of that again and again. My drive in life is from the horrible fear of being mediocre. And that's always pushing me. Because even though I become somebody, I still have to prove that I'm somebody. My struggle has never ended, and it probably never will. I mean, this is from an interview right here. Tom Brady, back in the early 2000s, after he had won a couple of Super Bowls, was being interviewed. Maybe you've seen it before. And he gets interviewed and basically say, man, you've accomplished everything you could possibly imagine. Being a lower round draft pick, coming from a smaller college, you know, you've made it. You've accomplished it. You have a beautiful wife. You have everything that you could possibly imagine. And they're like, what's next? Are you satisfied? And he's like, I'm not. I mean, when you watch the video, it's amazing because he's not a believer in Jesus, but he's over there simply saying, you know, I don't know what's next. I got to keep going. There's more. I need to do more of this. As long as you think it's more of something other than Christ Jesus, you will always need more of that something, because you're always going to need to fill the empty void within you. It's always. I mean, I find myself knowing this very thing and yet doing the very opposite of it, feeling like I've got to prove myself again and again and again and again, because I'm trying to prove myself to people who don't even really exist. They're the shadow figure, and yet Jesus is saying, when you are in me, I have already accomplished it all. I've already perceived and done which you could never do. You are in Christ Jesus. You have worth. You have value. No one can add or take away from that. But yet so many times we're always trying to build ourselves up. For the last 2 centuries, we've been told by those in secular education that if we only had more education, if we only had more grasp of knowledge, then we would be better people. And I want to say this to you. In the 20th century, the mass genocides that took place, most of them were by what? Non-believing atheists who were very much so intelligent. The German people were ahead of their time in the sense of technology and other things, and yet they did what? Murdered millions upon millions upon millions of people. Education is not the answer, though it can be a very good thing, though it can cure many cancers and ills and other things, but the answer is Jesus Christ alone. So relationships are summed up in 2 categories. This is not in your worship guide, but we have people we feel superior over, and we have people we feel superior or inferior under. You know, a good example of that is sometimes when I go visit churches. I love to go when I'm out of town to another church. Part of the problem that I have when I go to another church is I can't enjoy another church. And you're saying, what do you mean you can't enjoy another church? Is because you think that our church is better? No. It's that I'm always looking at their stuff. You know, I walk in their doors and I'm looking at their ceiling. I'm looking at their lights. I'm looking at their sound system. I'm looking at their board. I'm looking at their stuff. And here's the crazy part, especially if you've had someone in the last, little bit tell you, your preaching's okay, but, you really could make some improvements there. Well, so when you go to another church, you're hearing that pastor talk and you're like critiquing what's going on. It's a mixture of, well, I could have said that better. I would have thought that out better. Or, wow, I'm never going to be that good. I'll never be able to know the things that he knows or be able to talk the way that he talks or explain the things that he does. And so you have what? Two sides of the equation. One looking down and one looking up. One provoking, one envying. And we find ourselves, if you are not in step with the Spirit, if you're not living with the Spirit, if you're not finding your worth in Jesus Christ alone, you will always be on one side of that equation. Even people that we hang out with, even people that are close to us, we always categorize areas where, I'm better than that. I'm better in that area than they are. And again, those might be facts, but again, it's the difference between looking at it and saying, I'm better than they are. Or man, I don't even want to be around them because they're doing something so much better than I am, and causes people to be envious and jealous of one another when we ought not to be. What does Jesus say to us? Jesus says in Matthew 11:28, come to me. All you who are trying to earn your righteousness, all of you who are trying to prove yourself again and again and again, all of you who are burdened because it's never good enough. Sometimes it's not the pressure of other people, it's the pressure that you're never satisfied with yourself. You're never going to be the person that you ought to be. It's like you're always comparing yourself to the supposed perfect you when God created you. God created you. If you don't find your worth in Christ, where are you going to find it? Because it's going to have to change every single time you get tired of doing what you're doing. It's going to have to change every single time. If you want to gain yourself, Jesus made it very clear, you're first going to have to lose yourself. That's something this world does not want to hear. To live means that we must first die. And Jesus proved that to us. Remember what it says that he did? He came here on earth and he emptied himself of his glory. Not that he stopped being God, but he made himself to be as a slave so that he who was rich helped us by becoming poor so that we might become rich. He who was righteous became our righteousness. We receive it all from Jesus Christ. Philippians 2:5-9. Mark this in your notes. It's on the screen if you want to read it. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. That word right there is actually slave. Lowest form possible. Took the form of one of us. It tells us in Isaiah 52 that his form was not anything that we would look and say, wow, he was amazing. You realize that if you were on earth and you were looking for some hot shot, Jesus was not the one you were going to be looking to. It says that his form was not something that we would gaze upon. He was not something we would say, wow, that's powerful, or wow, that's beautiful, or wow, that's majestic. That was not his form here on earth. But he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, being found in human form. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name. You will destroy relationships as long as you have a conceited view. As long as you have an inferiority complex, you're going to try to tear them down because you think that they're better than you and you want to bring them on your level. Or as long as you have a superiority complex, you're always going to look down, always going to treat them ill simply because you're like, they're not as good as me. You will always be dissatisfied with the relationships you have in life. For it tells us in James 4:10, if you want to be raised up, what must you first do? Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Point 2 is this: only the gospel empowers us to restore another with gentleness. Only the gospel does this. Only the gospel changes our view in relationships where we're not trying to find worth from what we can get from other people, but we find worth in who Christ is and who he is in us and who we are in him. Paul assumed that we were going to have trouble. Verse 1, he says, if you're caught in sin, also don't be tempted in the process of restoring them. Verse 2, if you suffer, you're going to suffer. There's going to be troubles. There's going to be burdens to carry. Verse 3 through 5, jealousy and fighting. What do all these have in common? They're all about what? Relationships. Every single one of these are about relationships. Look with me at verse 1. It says, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch over yourself, lest you too be tempted. Lest you too be tempted. You usually have two types of personalities, and I don't mean that these are the only types, but you usually have the one that's overly kind or the one that's overly bold. The overly kind, if you will, kind of leans towards the people pleaser, right? You'll do anything to, avoid conflict of any type. Like it's a yes man or a yes woman. I'm going to say whatever I need to do. I just don't want to deal with that. Just whatever's necessary. And then the other person is almost like they have a chip on their shoulder, kind of looking for, listen, if you're not going to do it my way, then I'm either done with you or you're going to change your way. They have that bold and that harsh way of approaching people. If you don't have the Spirit in you, you are always going to approach people on one or two of those sides of the equations where you're always trying to just be a people pleaser, or you're always going to be abrupt and somewhat hard when you come to them. I was just talking to my new brother-in-law and sister-in-law as well the other day, and they're taking a leadership position at their church, and they're kind of one of the two. It's a Jekyll and Hyde, if you will. I wouldn't say in a negative form, but nonetheless, two different personality types. You have one, Taylor's over here saying, you've got to be kind. Like, you can't just approach people like, where were you at and what happened and what dropped the ball, And he's over here saying, well, you can't always just, worry about things when no one's doing what they're supposed to be doing. I kind of laughed. I was like, wow, it's going to be a cool journey, because I can see a lot of Erica and myself in there, because Erica softens a lot of times my opinions that are not always right or kind. And so she helps me to say, okay, I want to see it from another perspective. I want to see it from someone else's viewpoint, what they're going through, what's happening. And she helps me see things from a much better viewpoint. But that's why we need each other. We need one another. Notice this, how Jesus approached Mary and Martha when Lazarus died. You don't have to turn there now, but in John chapter 11, Lazarus had died. He'd been dead for 4 days. Jesus is taking his disciples to there, and he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He knows what he's going to do, but yet he comes there after he's already been dead. And when he comes up there, it says that Martha hears about Jesus coming, and so Martha takes off to go to Jesus. Mary maintains to be at the house weeping, and Martha comes up to Jesus and says, if you would have only been here, my brother would not have died. Now watch this. Jesus says two different things to the same question. If you would have only been here, my brother would not have died. And he said this, he will rise again. And she says, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection. And he goes, I am the resurrection. Now listen, if your brother had just died or your sister had just died, you don't want anyone coming up to you saying, if you could have been there to heal them. And they're over saying, if you just would have been here, it would have been okay. And here's Jesus saying, rather than being like, well, come here, I'm so sorry, I should have been here. I'm so sorry, I should have. Think about how you would react to somebody. You'd be gentle, you'd be soft, and Jesus is coming up to her just straight and saying, he will rise again. So then she takes off, and then Mary comes out to see him. Mary's weeping, comes, and she doesn't stand up. She falls before his feet, and she says, Master, if you would have only been here, my brother would have lived. They said the exact same things, but how does Jesus approach him? To Martha, it's more blunt. It's more direct. It's how she needed it. But to Mary, it says that he looked at her and looked at all those who were following her, who were weeping. And he said, where's his body? And he says, overcome within his own spirit. It says, here's the shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:35. It says that Jesus wept. That's not just like starting to sob. It's like a loud, he wept. Okay, when we're filled with the Spirit of God, the way that we approach people is different. Because what are we trying to do? We're trying to do what? reach them where they're at. Treat them how they need to be treated. Love them as individuals and not just put a blanket statement on them. Some people need to be approached with gentleness and kindness, and other people, you just need to tell them what's going on and be direct with them. And Jesus exemplifies that to us. So if you find someone caught in sin, you don't just immediately go to them. I'm going to give you 3 criteria. These are not in the worship guide, but think about these. When you want to help someone, this is how you do it. The sin has to become repetitive. You know, you begin to do what? The first way that you approach someone, take the log out of your eye before you begin to get a speck in someone else's, which means stick to your own business, pray for that person, love on that person, direct that person. But when you begin to see it become repetitive, that may be the time when you begin to speak to that person directly about what's going on in their life. Number 2, if they are blind or deceived by the sin they're committing. There's a lot of people, they don't even think twice about what they're doing. Some people are just ignorant of what they're doing, and you as a brother or sister in Christ need to love them by approaching them in truth and love. And thirdly is you are someone the person will listen to. You're someone the person will listen to. If the person has wronged you and you're coming up to them and calling them out, most likely they're not going to listen to you if you're being abrasive. You need to figure out, am I the right person to approach them? Is what's going on in this situation the way I ought to be approaching it? So he talks about how we should restore one another. And to be restored means literally to set and to mend like a dislocated bone. See, that's what sin actually is. It's something that's good being taken and then overhauling it and making it into idolatry. Sex is good, right? Yes, for the married people. Some of y'all should be amening that a little louder for the married people. But outside the context of marriage, what does it do? It produces all kinds of destruction. It does. Physical, relational, mental, emotional. Power is not a bad thing. Power used for wicked causes is a bad thing. Knowledge is not a bad thing, but knowledge used for wicked causes is a bad thing. Sin is literally saying that you're taking something good and then you're overhauling, you're perverting it, you're twisting it. So here's in your notes, if you want to take this down, how to help someone. Number 1 is this: you will have to almost get in their shoes. You've heard it before, where they tell you if you want to know what someone's gone through, you walk a mile in their shoes. Well, you can't actually get in their shoes. You didn't go through what they went through. You don't have the same emotional setup as they have. You haven't had the same upbringing as they have. You don't see the same world that they see. But here's the deal. You do have to listen to them until you understand, until they felt as though they are understood. You notice how I just said that? You have to listen to them until you feel that you understand them and that they feel that they've been understood. That makes a huge difference in the way in which you approach people and the way in which you care. You ever had someone that you just discussed something with that was really bothering you and they didn't add anything to the conversation, but they just listened to you and they even agreed with you on certain areas? How much better you felt when you came out of that situation? Like it wasn't anything that changed. Your reality did not change, but you had someone who sat there, someone who listened to you, someone who engaged with you, someone who said, you know what, the things that you're talking about, you're going in the right direction. Just keep on doing those things. Nothing changed, but your perception changed. Your perception changed. It makes a huge difference when someone is listened to, someone is understood, and when you begin to sit in their shoes as best you can. Secondly is some of the burden has to become your burden. Verse 2, it says this: bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Some of their burden has to become your burden. We said it earlier, I'll say it again, relationships are difficult. But when someone is going through a difficult time and you really want to help them, it is going to cost you. There's going to be weight. To bear one another's burden. What does bear even mean? Bear means to get up underneath. Bear means to literally hold with one's hands, meaning whatever they're going through, it's going to be with you. You can't say that you're bearing someone's burden and not feeling any weight. How about that? Is that a better way of saying it? You've got to feel the weight. Otherwise, you're just a bystander, maybe giving them advice. But otherwise, you're not bearing it with them. I can tell you this, some of the hardest seasons for me and what I've done here is when walking with a couple who's going through just this internal fight, struggle, trying to save their marriage, but yet just trying to rip each other apart. And so you're meeting with these people, you're talking with these people, you're embracing these people, and you're telling them what you think would be good advice, but then they use the very advice that you give, which would really work well if they did it, to destroy one another and then tell each other, well, Pastor Josh said this. Well, Pastor Josh said this about you. And I'm just like, I didn't say any of those things in the context that you're saying them, which makes me almost want to say, I don't want to say anything, period. You know? If you really want to get in there with somebody, you're going to have to bear some weight. There's no way around that. And third is this, fulfilling the law of Christ, it will cost you. What's the law of Christ? It's reiterated from the Old Testament, in particular in the Ten Commandments, but then Jesus does the exact same thing in John 13. What is it? To love. They will know you by your love for one another. I want to say this to you very clearly. When you fulfill the law of Christ, it will cost you. I want you to think about it for a second. If someone has difficult financial times, like they're going through a very difficult time and you know them, you care about them, you're concerned with them, and they, for one reason or another, maybe they did make bad decisions, but now they're making the right decisions. But you know as well as I do, the only way they're going to jump out of that situation is that you begin to help them. What good is it to do just to send them away and say, well, I'll just pray for you and I hope everything's okay, when you have the money to do it? Bear the burden. If it doesn't weigh anything on you, you are just a bystander. I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm wanting to hammer that in because a lot of us think, you know what, well, I'm helping them. You know, I listen to them. No, are you helping them? Are you carrying some weight with them? I wrote this down just to make sure I didn't mess it up. If you only give of your time, money, or abilities to the point that it will not affect you in any noticeable way, you are not bearing someone else's burden. Did y'all hear that? Because here's the deal. We will give as long as it doesn't affect our lifestyle. Come on. We will give as long as it doesn't affect our lifestyle, as long as it doesn't affect the trip that we have, as long as it doesn't affect the car that we want, as long as it doesn't affect the clothes that we wear, we'll do it. We'll give of our time as long as it doesn't affect the football coming up, the football game, or whatever it is. We will give as long as everything still maintains to be exactly how we want it to be. Here's the deal. You can deceive yourself, and I can deceive myself because I do it all the time, but you're not bearing a burden. Now, does that mean that you're going to be someone's savior? No, only Jesus can save someone, okay? Because otherwise, you're going to be on the opposite end of the spectrum, who's always trying to go and save someone, and really what you're doing isn't empowering them to continue that lifestyle because some people just need to be told no. You see what I'm saying? I'm just saying, use Christian wisdom here, but I'm simply saying that if nothing costs you ever, then don't say that you're honestly walking with them. You might be somewhere beside them, but you're not bearing the weight with them. Jesus, again, exemplifies the very thing we're talking about. Isaiah 53, 4 and 5. Surely he has done what? Come on, church. He has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Man, that's good, isn't it? He carried them to the cross. No one more free than Jesus, ever. And we're saying we're following Jesus. We're imitating Christ. No one more free than Jesus. Therefore, we exemplify him. We imitate him. We follow him. You want to experience freedom? The world tells you to devour. You want to experience freedom? Serve one another. It makes no sense from this side of the spectrum until you begin to actually do it. Until you begin to actually care about people. See, relationships make life, honestly, in many ways worth living. You know? Yes, they're hard. Yes, they're difficult, but think about when you see someone succeed that you knew you had some part of it, just some piece to it, that you were just cheering them on, encouraging them, or you were with them. How much joy does that bring you because you know that you were for them rather than being against them? Rather than provoking them or rather than envying them, you are coming alongside them. Makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? And last, as we close, each of us will stand before God to give an account. Each of us will stand before God. Notice what he says in verse 4. Start with verse 3. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, you're delusional, you're deceiving yourself. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not his neighbor, for each will have to bear his own load. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? It means stop looking at who's next to you. Am I doing better than they are? Am I doing better than they are? Are they doing better than I am? What do I need to get ahead of them? You know what I'm saying? Stop doing that comparison game. You will always be a miserable person if you're always in the comparison game. What does he say? Compare yourself to last year. Compare yourself to you last year. Compare yourself to you last month. And then look at the progress. We did that as a kid, and I know a lot of y'all did that. We had a wall in our kitchen, and my dad, he would put a little a pencil, and he would mark where we're at and how old we were and all that kind of good stuff. And you would see the growth, and my growth stopped too short. Like I was supposed to go a little bit taller, but I stopped. And I think God did that in many ways just to keep me humble. And so I thank him for that rather than being 6'5". I wouldn't probably be here today. Erica always jokes with me. She's like, I said, if I was 6'5", I could play some basketball. And Erica's like, there's a good reason you probably weren't 6'5", Josh. I'm like, fair enough. For if anyone thinks he's something when he's nothing, he does what? He deceives himself. Without Christ, we're nothing. Without Christ, we're nothing. What did Jesus say? Just so you're like, well, I don't believe that. Okay, keep thinking through it. You can do nothing apart from me. Apart from being filled with the Spirit of God, even your good works are filthy rags to the Lord. None is righteous, no, not one. Like the world tells you that you need to have this super high, exploding evaluation of yourself. And the Bible says, let me tell you the truth. Apart from Christ, you are nothing. You are deceiving yourself. You are overinflated. Apart from Christ. Erica got Snapchat the other day. I don't think that's a good thing. She talked me into getting it as well, and I don't even know how to use it. But when she got it, you make a profile. And you're not supposed to make your own profile because you'll try to make the profile look really maybe like a super you or something that doesn't look like you. And she ended up turning herself into what appears to me to be an Indian girl with a very small figure and all the rest. And I was like, Erica, that doesn't even remotely look like you. Like if someone was like saw your name and then saw the figure, like nobody would even recognize you. So her sister the other night grabbed hold of him and was like, oh my gosh, Erica, is that an Indian girl or is that a black girl? That's not you though. I mean, you're not even the same skin pigment. And so she starts tearing it apart. But it's the same way about us. We begin to over-evaluate, over-esteem ourselves when reality says we're nothing apart from Christ. And some of you say, you know what, but if you take that viewpoint, you'll never achieve anything in life. Okay, Paul said, I'm nothing. Numerous occasions, and he achieved far more than you'll ever achieve in your life. He achieved far more than any of us will ever achieve in our life. So the first is this, as we get ready to close, we must first recognize our nothingness. Otherwise, if you don't find your value in Christ, if you do not find your worth in Christ, if you do not find your identity in Christ, you will always be a Madonna. You will. You will always be the person saying, I've got to earn it. I've got to reinvent myself. I've got to continually over and over and over and over establish myself. Does that mean we don't work? Absolutely not. It means that we find our value, our worth, our satisfaction, our joy, our pleasure, our eternal value in Jesus Christ. And secondly is everyone starts their Christian journey in a different place. Verse 5, for each will have to bear his own load. You know, when you're comparing yourself to someone else, even fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, you got to think, they come from a totally different place than you do. They come from a totally different place than you do. Maybe they're not as far along as you are in the sense of the things that they say and the things that they do, but maybe the Lord is only 10% in their journey of 100%. And maybe you thinking you're as special as you are still have so far to go. Because again, if you have that attitude about yourself, if you and I have that attitude about ourselves of superiority over others, or envying others and wanting to pull them down and destroy them, that in and of itself says two things. Declares our immaturity and declares that we are not living by, being led by, or walking in step with the Spirit of God. If all you're ever doing and all I'm ever doing is comparing myself to others and finding a way either to get ahead of them or to pull them back with me, we're not walking in step with the Spirit of God. I close with what the chapter 5 starts with, Galatians 5:1. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Freedom, not enslavement. Not enslavement. Freedom that he's already done it. He's already accomplished it. Freedom. Let's stand together. Let's pray.